Welcome back, everyone. We're diving into a really pivotal moment today. The return of the Jewish exiles from Babylon to Jerusalem.
An incredible journey.
It really is. We're going to be focusing on chapters 1 through 3 of the book of Ezra, those firsthand accounts.
You really get a feel for what they went through.
Yeah, imagine decades spent longing for home, and suddenly everything changes.
It's more than just politics, though, isn't it?
Right. It goes so much deeper than that. And it all starts with this proclamation from King Cyrus of Persia. And here's the crazy thing. Cyrus wasn't Jewish,
No.
yet he's the one who issues this decree, not only allowing but actually encouraging the Jewish exiles to go back to Jerusalem.
It's quite remarkable. Not just permitting, but supporting the return, even acknowledging the God of Israel.
It's really unique. I mean, why do you think he did that?
It's an interesting question. It makes you think maybe he was moved by their situation? Or was it strategic? A way to stabilize the region?
Could be both, right?
Absolutely. A little of both. Allowing them to return, rebuild their temple, it could foster loyalty to him.
Create stability.
Exactly. But the fact that he acknowledges their God, that sets this apart. It suggests a level of respect, maybe even a bit of curiosity beyond just politics,
Get this. He doesn't stop there. Cyrus tells his own people to support the effort. Basically, he says, hey, everyone, pitch in. Help these folks get back on their feet. Silver, gold, supplies, whatever they need.
Remarkable generosity.
It really is. It shows that this return wasn't just a Jewish thing. The Persian Empire played a part too.
Adding another layer to the whole story.
Okay, but here's where it gets even more fascinating. Remember all those sacred vessels, the ones Nebuchadnezzar took from the temple?
Oh, yes. During the Babylonian conquest.
Decades earlier, Cyrus orders those to be returned too.
The text actually lists every single item.
I know. 30 gold dishes, 1,000 silver dishes, bowls, other items, the total.
Staggering 5,400.
5,400. Can you imagine unpacking all of that?
After all those years.
It must have been so emotional, all those treasures, all that history coming back.
These weren't just objects, they were symbols of their faith, their past, their identity. This was about reclaiming what had been lost, their sacred heritage.
It's like piecing together a broken past. And speaking of piecing things together, the book of Ezra then goes into a detailed list of everyone who returned. Every family, every individual.
Oh, the long list, yes.
Meticulously recorded. But why go through all that trouble, do you think?
It reflects how important lineage and communal identity are in Jewish tradition.
So it's more than just a head count.
Much more. It's about preserving their history, their heritage for generations to come.
Okay, that makes sense.
Yeah.
So the list isn't random.
No, it's structured. It breaks down the returnees by family groups and where they were originally from. You really get a feel for the scale of this return.
The complexity of it all.
And it wasn't just priests who returned. You also had Levites, the ones who assisted with temple duties, singers, gatekeepers, even descendants of Solomon's servants. It highlights all the different roles needed to rebuild, not just the temple, but their whole community.
A whole society coming back to life. It wasn't just about bricks and mortar, right? It was about bringing back their traditions.
Their whole way of life.
But there is this one detail that stands out, isn't there? 652 people who couldn't prove their lineage, and they were excluded from priestly duties.
Yes, a poignant detail.
Why was that?
Well, it highlights how strict they were about religious lineage and what happened if you couldn't prove it. It shows that even in this moment of joy, of renewal, there were still complexities and challenges.
A reminder that history is rarely simple.
Rarely.
So they arrive in Jerusalem, this diverse group, carrying their history, their hopes, these precious objects. What did they do first?
They rebuilt the altar for burnt offerings.
Before anything else. Why the altar first?
It was deeply symbolic. Rebuilding the altar meant they were reestablishing their covenant with God, a declaration that their connection was being restored.
Powerful. And all this amidst the ruins of their city.
It really speaks to their resilience, their determination to reclaim their spiritual identity.
And they were surrounded by people who didn't necessarily share their beliefs, right?
The text even mentions they were terrified of the peoples of the lands.
It must have taken immense courage to rebuild that altar.
It was an act of faith. A statement. They were back.
And they were here to stay. And with the altar rebuilt, they could resume the daily burnt offerings.
A central part of their religious practice.
They also celebrated the Feast of Booths, a major festival, right?
Yes. Commemorating their ancestors' journey through the desert after escaping Egypt.
Wow. So they were really focused on reestablishing their religious life.
Right away. The Feast of Booths is about building temporary shelters, a reminder of their vulnerability and their reliance on God.
Even as they were rebuilding their physical structures, they were acknowledging their dependence on God.
Exactly.
And then comes the big moment, laying the foundation of the temple itself.
The text paints a vivid picture. Priests blowing trumpets, Levites singing praises, and the people, well, they experienced a wave of emotions.
Man, must have been an incredible moment.
Some wept, remembering the first temple, Solomon's temple, the one that was destroyed. Others rejoiced at the new beginning, a sign of hope for the future.
A real mix of emotions. You can almost feel the weight of history in that moment,
And the hope for the future.
all coming together.
And again, the details are so meticulous. The altar being built first shows how important worship was. They even hired skilled workers from Sidon and Tyre,
Interesting.
highlighting the role of collaboration, even trade in the rebuilding.
So it wasn't just about the Jewish people.
Exactly. The music, the singing, the raw emotion, it all creates this powerful story of renewal and resilience.
But like you said earlier, this is just the beginning. There's so much more to this story, so many challenges they had to face. We'll dive into all that in our next segment.
Welcome back. We're diving deeper into the book of Ezra. As the rebuilding was underway, a new set of challenges popped up. It wasn't all smooth sailing, was it?
Rebuilding a temple,
Yeah.
an entire society. It sounds daunting. What kind of issues did they run into?
Well, opposition from their neighbors was a major one. Remember, these people were returning to a land that had been under foreign control for a long time. Not everyone was happy about it.
Yeah, you can imagine the worry about power dynamics shifting.
Exactly. They saw this return, this rebuilding of the temple as a threat,
Yeah.
potentially destabilizing things.
So how did these neighboring groups react? Did they try to stop them?
Oh, they did. The text mentions a group called the people of the land. It was a mix of different groups who'd settled in the region during the exile. They actually approached Zerubbabel. He was leading the returning exiles, and they offered to help with the temple.
That sounds a little suspicious, like a Trojan horse kind of thing.
You got it. They claimed they wanted to worship the same God, but their motives were probably not so pure. Probably wanted to take control of the whole project.
Wow, sneaky. So what did Zerubbabel and the others do?
They saw right through it. They
Yeah.
said, nope, we were specifically told by God to do this. We can't share that responsibility.
It must have taken some guts to stand up to them like that, especially since those people of the land probably had more power at that point.
It did take courage, but they were determined to fulfill what they believed was God's mission.
And that rejection did make things worse.
Oh, yeah. It triggered a wave of opposition.
So things escalated. What did that look like?
The people of the land got creative. Rumors, intimidation, even bribes, trying to hinder the project any way they could.
So they were really making things difficult. Did any of it work?
It did cause delays, yeah. Setbacks. The construction actually stopped for a while because of it.
That's rough. After everything they'd been through, finally back home, trying to rebuild their lives, their faith, and they're facing this constant resistance. It must have been exhausting.
It definitely wasn't easy, but their resilience is striking. Despite everything, they never gave up hope. They believed this was a divine mission that kept them going through the tough times.
That unwavering faith, it must have been their anchor.
It was. And then came the prophets,
Okay.
like Haggai and Zechariah. They helped re-energize the people, urged them to keep going, reminded them of God's promises.
Those prophets, they were vital. Keeping that flame of hope burning, it shows how much leadership matters. And faith, even when things are hard.
Absolutely. This story isn't just about bricks and mortar. It's about rebuilding a people, their spirit, their identity.
It's about that human capacity for hope, even in the darkest moments. So they faced opposition, they kept going, but did they actually finish the temple?
They did. It took years. It wasn't easy.
Yeah.
But they built the second temple. Imagine that feeling of accomplishment.
It must have been incredible after all that struggle to see it standing there.
It must have been a moving dedication ceremony. Years of labor, a generations-old dream coming true. It might not have been as grand as Solomon's temple, but it was a symbol of their relationship with God restored, a beacon of hope.
It really shows what you can achieve with faith and determination, even when the odds are stacked against you.
And it's not just about the physical temple. This story is also about spiritual and moral rebuilding. And that's where Ezra himself comes in.
Ezra. I was wondering when he'd show up. He seems like a key figure in this whole process.
You're right. While Zerubbabel focused on the building itself, Ezra focused on something different. the spiritual and moral renewal of the people.
So not just bricks and mortar, but hearts and minds.
Exactly. Ezra was a priest, a scribe, really learned in the law of Moses. His mission was to restore religious observance, make sure people were living by God's laws.
That's a big task.
Yeah.
How did he go about doing that?
He was pretty strategic about it. He set up a school to teach the law. He publicly read and explained the scriptures. He worked tirelessly to reform things that had strayed from tradition.
Sounds like he was a real reformer, bringing people back to their roots.
Precisely. He saw that during the exile, some had adopted foreign customs and ways of doing things. His goal was to purify their worship, get their religious life back on solid ground.
It sounds like a delicate balance, though. Upholding tradition while also dealing with a community that had been through so much change.
It was a tough job. And not everyone liked his ideas. There was pushback, conflict, but Ezra was committed to what he believed was right.
It seems like every step forward in this story comes with a new challenge.
It does, doesn't it? But that's how rebuilding works. It's rarely smooth sailing. Setbacks, obstacles, doubt, despair. But ultimately, it's about the commitment, the willingness to keep going no matter what. That's what determines the outcome.
That's a great point. It makes you think about our own lives, our own communities. How often do we give up on something because it gets hard?
It's a good question to ask ourselves. The story of the return from exile, with all its twists and turns, it's a model of resilience, of faith, of hope. And speaking of challenges, Ezra faced a big one. He found out that many of the returnees had married women from other nations.
That's interesting. What was the problem with intermarriage? I mean, weren't they all trying to rebuild together?
It goes back to their identity. Remember, this wasn't just about building a nation. It was about rebuilding a people who were chosen by God. Intermarriage was seen as a threat to that. It blurred the lines that made them unique.
So it was about preserving their heritage, religious and cultural?
Exactly. They were worried that these foreign wives would bring in other gods, other practices, that it would weaken their commitment to God's laws. It wasn't about shutting people out. It was about protecting who they were.
I can see why that would be a concern for them.
Yeah.
So how did Ezra handle this?
He was devastated. The text says he tore his clothes, pulled his hair, just fell into despair. For him, this wasn't just a small thing. It felt like a betrayal of their agreement with God. Like everything they'd worked for was at risk.
Wow, that's a strong reaction. It really shows how seriously they took this whole idea of intermarriage.
For Ezra, it was a crisis. He felt like their whole future was in jeopardy.
So what did he do? Did he try to talk to people about it? Or did he do something more drastic?
He called a big meeting, confessed their sins, said they hadn't followed God's laws. It must have been intense. And then he made a radical decision: divorce. He told the men they had to send their foreign wives away, along with their children.
That's a really tough call. Even considering their beliefs, it seems extreme.
It was a controversial move, no doubt. Caused a lot of pain. But Ezra felt it was necessary, a way to purify the community, to make sure they survived spiritually. He felt they needed to take a stand, to reaffirm their commitment to God.
I can only imagine how hard that must have been for everyone. Families split apart, lives turned upside down. It shows that even when you're trying to do the right thing, there can be unintended consequences. And they can be really painful.
It adds a whole other layer to Ezra's story. He was a man of strong beliefs, totally dedicated to God's will. But his actions also make you think about leadership and the hard choices you sometimes have to make.
It really does. This idea of balancing tradition and compassion, something we still struggle with today.
Absolutely. It's a timeless question. How do you balance different values? How do you weigh the needs of the group against the needs of individuals? It's a reminder that things are rarely simple in history or in life.
All right, we're back. Still digging into the book of Ezra. We've seen the return, the rebuilding, all the challenges they faced. And now in these last chapters, there's this whole other issue, something that goes beyond outside threats or politics.
It's about who they were as a people, their core identity, the issue of intermarriage. Ezra discovers that many had married women from the surrounding nations, priests, Levites even.
You'd think after everything, it wouldn't matter who people married. Why was it such a big deal?
It goes back to their covenant with God. This wasn't just about creating a nation or even a community. It was about being a people set apart, chosen. Intermarriage was a threat to that. It blurred the lines,
So it wasn't about intolerance
Mm-hmm.
or excluding people. It was about protecting their heritage.
Exactly. They were afraid those foreign wives would bring in different beliefs, different practices, and it might weaken their own faith, their commitment to God's laws. It was about safeguarding who they were at their core.
Okay, that makes sense. So how did Ezra react when he found out about all this intermarriage?
It hit him hard. The text says he was devastated, tore his clothes, pulled out his hair. He was in despair. This wasn't just a minor thing to him. It was like a betrayal of their covenant. Everything they'd worked for felt threatened.
Wow. You can really feel his anguish. Shows how deeply they felt about this.
For Ezra, this was a crisis point. He felt like everything was at stake. Their future, their very survival.
What did he do?
He brought everyone together, publicly confessed their sins, acknowledged they hadn't followed God's laws, and then he came up with a solution, a radical one.
What was it?
Divorce. He said the men had to send their foreign wives away and their children.
That's a really difficult decision. Even considering everything, it seems so extreme.
It was definitely controversial, caused a lot of pain, but Ezra felt it was the only way to purify the community, to ensure their spiritual survival. He felt they needed to make a clear break, a strong statement about their commitment.
It's a reminder that even when you're trying to do what's right, there could be consequences, difficult ones.
You're right. It adds another dimension to Ezra's story. He was a man of deep conviction, determined to follow God's will, but his actions also raise questions about how we balance tradition and compassion.
Yeah, tough questions. It's something we're still grappling with today.
Absolutely. It's a timeless issue. How do you balance different values? How do you consider the needs of the group versus the individual? These aren't easy answers.
So what happened next? How did things unfold after the divorces?
The book of Ezra doesn't go into a lot of detail about the immediate aftermath, but it does suggest that Ezra's reforms, controversial as they were, had a lasting impact. They really solidified the community's identity, laid the groundwork for Judaism to flourish in the years to come.
So even with all the heartache, there was a sense of renewal.
There was. It's a reminder that rebuilding, whether it's a nation, a community, or even our own lives, it's rarely easy. It's messy, it's complicated. There are tough choices and sacrifices. But what matters is that commitment to a shared vision, to those values and beliefs that hold us together. That's what allows us to not just survive, but thrive.
And that brings us back to the heart of this whole journey, the return, the rebuilding, the resilience, facing those impossible odds and finding a way forward.
Exactly. The book of Ezra shows us what's possible, even when things seem hopeless, when the challenges feel overwhelming. Faith, resilience, that shared commitment to something bigger than ourselves, that's what allows us to renew, to grow, to make that triumphant return. It's a story that speaks to us even today. Across centuries, it reminds us that a new beginning is always possible.
That's a powerful message to end on. Thank you so much for taking us on this journey through the book of Ezra. I know I learned a lot.
It's been my pleasure. I hope everyone listening has found something to think about. Keep exploring, keep asking those tough questions, and keep diving deep into these stories that connect us to the past and illuminate our present.
Welcome to Charlie and Mia's podcast. We're embarking on an exciting journey to read through the entire Bible in just 1 year. Every day, we dive into Scripture, exploring its meanings and how it applies to our lives today. We invite you to join us on this incredible adventure of learning and discovery. Don't forget to subscribe to our channel so you never miss an episode.